The stars stretched endlessly before the viewing port, and Captain Hyun-woo felt something close to peace for the first time in months. Behind him, 50,000 souls slept in cryogenic pods, dreaming of the new world that awaited them. The ship times, eternal dawn times, had traveled for 8 months through the darkness between stars, and now their destination hung before them like a blue-green jewel. Kepler 442b. Their new home. Dr. Minji stood beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. She had studied this planet for 3 years before they left Earth, memorized every data point, every atmospheric reading, every promise it held. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Even more beautiful than the scans showed." "I do, thousand." Hyun-woo nodded but said nothing. He had learned long ago not to trust beauty. He had been a soldier before he became a ship captain, and soldiers knew that pretty things often hid dangers. But the data did not lie. Kepler 442b had oxygen, water, land, and no signs of intelligent life. It was perfect. Behind them, young Daeho worked at his engineering station, running final checks on the landing systems. At 25, he was the youngest senior officer on the ship, brilliant with machines, but naive about people. "All systems green, Captain," he reported. "We can begin wake-up procedures whenever you're ready." "Do it," Hyun-woo ordered. "Wake the colonists. Let them see their new world." Over the next 6 hours, the ship came alive. 50,000 people emerged from their sleeping pods, confused and hungry, but filled with hope. Children pressed their faces against viewing ports. Adults held hands and cried. They had left Earth behind, left the overcrowded cities, and poisoned air, and endless wars over water and food. This was their second chance. Saman gathered her 2 children close as she looked down at the planet below. Her husband had died 2 years ago in the food riots in Seoul, and she had sold everything they owned to buy passage on this ship. She told her daughter, "That's home now. That's where you'll grow up, where you'll have clean air and room to run." The landing took 3 days. They brought down the prefabricated buildings first, then the agricultural equipment, then the people. The first colonists to step onto Kepler 442b soil wept with joy. The air smelled sweet. The sky was the perfect shade of blue. The grass beneath their feet felt soft and welcoming. "We made it," Daeho said, laughing as he helped unload supplies. "We actually made it." For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed perfect. The colonists built their homes. They planted their first crops in soil that tests showed was rich with nutrients. The children ran and played in fields that had never known human footsteps. At night, they gathered around fires and sang songs about their journey, about leaving the old world behind, about the future they would build together. Dr. Minji worked 16-hour days in her laboratory, studying samples of local plants and soil. Everything fascinated her. The ecosystem here had evolved differently than Earth, but it was compatible with human life. The plants used photosynthesis. The water was clean. Even the local bacteria seemed harmless. "This planet is a gift," she told anyone who would listen. But on the 15th day, things began to change. The first crops, which should have been thriving in the rich soil, turned brown and died overnight. Farmers stood in their fields, confused and worried. They planted again, using different seeds, but the same thing happened. Every plant they brought from Earth withered and collapsed. Then the livestock began to act strange. The chickens stopped laying eggs and attacked each other. The cattle became wild-eyed and aggressive, breaking through fences and running into the wilderness. 3 cows were found dead at the edge of the forest, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions. The colonists told themselves it was just adjustment. New world, new challenges. They would adapt, but the nightmares started next. Almost everyone began having the same dream. They stood in an empty field under a dark sky, and something vast and invisible watched them from below the ground. In the dream, a voice spoke without words. telling them they did not belong, that they should leave, that they were not wanted here. People woke up screaming. Children refused to sleep. The medical staff could find no explanation. Minji suggested it might be something in the air, some chemical affecting their brains. But tests showed nothing unusual. Equipment began failing in impossible ways. Machines that had worked perfectly for months suddenly stopped. Computer systems crashed and displayed nonsense. Power generators shut down for no reason. Daeho spent every waking moment trying to fix things, but for every problem he solved, 3 more appeared. On the 30th day, Dr. Minji made a discovery that changed everything. Under her microscope, she found tiny crystalline structures in the soil samples. They were smaller than cells, arranged in complex geometric patterns, and they seemed to be growing. More than that, they seemed to be connected to each other, forming vast networks underground. She ran more tests, her hands shaking with excitement and fear. The crystals responded to electrical signals. They passed information between themselves. They were not alive in the way humans understood life. But they were not dead either. They were something in between. Something ancient and alien. "The planet is aware," she told Captain Hyunwoo. "These crystals form a kind of nervous system. The whole planet is one organism, and it knows we're here." That night, the earthquakes started. Small ones at first, barely noticeable. Then stronger. Buildings cracked. The ground split open, and through the ship's communication system came a message in perfect Korean, then English, then Chinese, then every language humanity spoke. The voice was not angry. It was not cruel. It was simply firm, like a parent correcting a child. "You are not welcome. Leave." Captain Hyunwoo stood in the command center as the ground shook beneath his feet. Around him, alarms screamed warnings. Outside, colonists ran through the streets in panic. He had made so many hard choices in his life, but none harder than this. "Prepare for evacuation," he said quietly. "We're leaving." Salmon held her crying children as they boarded the shuttle back to the ship. Around her, people shouted in anger and disbelief. They had given up everything for this. They had nowhere else to go. But the planet had spoken, and it would not change its mind. As the times, eternal dawn times, lifted away from Kepler 442b, 50,000 people looked back at the world they had tried to make home. The crops they had planted lay dead in the fields. The buildings they had raised stood empty. Their dreams remained behind, buried in soil that would never accept them. In the observation deck, Daeho stared at the shrinking planet with tears running down his face. "What do we do now?" he asked. Nobody had an answer. The times, eternal dawn times, drifted through space like a wounded bird. Inside, 50,000 people tried to make sense of what had happened. Children asked their parents when they could go home, and the parents had no answers. The ship's supplies would last another year, maybe 2, if they rationed carefully. After that, they would face a choice between starvation and returning to an Earth that had no room for them. Captain Hyunwoo called a meeting of his senior staff. Dr. Minji looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. Daeho sat hunched over, staring at his hands. Somin attended as the representative of the civilian colonists, her face hard and angry. "We have a backup destination," Hyunwoo said. "A moon orbiting a gas giant in the Tau Ceti system. The scans showed it was habitable. We have enough fuel to get there. The scans of Kepler 442b showed it was habitable too," Salmon said bitterly. "Look how that turned out. Nobody had a response to that. They voted anyway. There was nowhere else to go." The journey to Tau Ceti took 6 weeks. As they traveled, they received messages from other colony ships. The news was always the same. Settlements failing. Colonists evacuating. Worlds rejecting human presence in ways that seemed impossible. When the times eternal dawn times finally reached the moon, they found they were not the first to arrive. 3 other colony ships already orbited the small world, and the surface below showed the ruins of failed settlements. Captain Hyunwoo felt his stomach sink as he opened communication channels. The face that appeared on the screen looked hollow and defeated. Captain of the ship Times New Horizon *, a woman named Ji-won who had once been a coalition diplomat. "You might as well turn around," she said. "This place doesn't want us either." Factor. But they had nowhere else to go, so they went down anyway. On the surface, they met the survivors of the failed colonies. 4,000 people living in temporary shelters, slowly starving, waiting for a rescue that would never come. The story was always the same. The settlements had started well. Then the local life began fighting back. The moon was covered in bioluminescent fungal networks that glowed at night. Pretty, harmless looking, or so they thought. But the fungus had gotten into everything. It poisoned their food supplies, broke down their building materials, released spores that made people sick. "We tried to burn it," one survivor explained, "but it just grew back faster. We tried chemicals, but nothing worked. It's like the whole moon was trying to kill us." Hyunwoo ordered his people to set up camp far from the fungal networks. Maybe if they kept their distance, they could survive here. But deep down, he knew they were just delaying the inevitable. More ships arrived over the following weeks. The moon became a gathering place for failed colonies. A refugee camp floating in space. Thousands of people with nowhere to go, comparing stories, searching for answers. That was when Taeyang made his discovery. Taeyang was a data analyst, a quiet man in his 30s who had spent the journey compiling reports from all the failed colonies. He worked alone in a corner of the Times Eternal Dawn *, surrounded by screens filled with information. One evening, he called Captain Hyunwoo to his station. "I found a pattern," Taeyang said, his voice shaking with excitement and fear. "Every world we tried to settle, all 127 of them, they all have something in common." He brought up a star map showing humanity's attempted colonies. Red dots marked the failures. There were so many red dots. Out of 127 worlds, only 3 colonies had survived, and those were barely holding on. "What's the connection?" Hyunwoo asked. Taeyang pulled up another layer of data. 200 years ago, before we had faster-than-light travel, we sent out probe ships to explore nearby star systems. Those probes found something. Markers. Ancient structures on dozens of worlds. We called them architect sites. Dr. Minji leaned forward, suddenly interested. "I remember reading about those. They were billions of years old. We could never figure out what they were for." "They were markers," Taeyang said. "Every single world we tried to colonize, every single one that rejected us, had architect markers. The probes found them, took samples, and moved on. But I think those markers meant something. I think they were warnings." 1. He pulled up more data. Complex genetic sequences, analysis of planetary ecosystems. The architects seeded worlds with life. They engineered whole ecosystems, designed them for specific purposes we don't understand. And they built in defenses. If anything threatens their design, the planet itself fights back. "That's impossible," Salmon said. "Planets aren't alive. They can't think." "Not the way we think," Dr. Minji said slowly. "But a sufficiently complex system can exhibit intelligence. Neural networks. Distributed consciousness. We've been seeing it as separate events, separate species attacking us. But what if it's all connected? What if every world the architects touched is part of one vast network?" The implications settled over them like a heavy blanket. Humanity had not been unlucky. They had not made mistakes. They had walked into a trap that was set billions of years before humans even existed. Ji-won took on the task of contacting other spacefaring civilizations. Surely someone would help. Surely the galaxy was not completely closed to humanity. She sent messages to every known alien species, every government, every organization that might offer refuge. The responses came back one by one, and they were all the same. No. The Vorathians said they had no resources to spare. The Keltan Consortium called humanity dangerous and unpredictable. The Silicate Union accused humans of being chaos bringers who would upset the careful balance of galactic civilization. They're afraid of us, G1 reported to the assembled captains. Every species out there evolved on architect worlds. They're part of the system. We're the anomaly. The thing that doesn't fit. They see us as a threat. We're not a threat, Daeho protested. We're refugees. We're dying out here. It doesn't matter what we are, Hyunwoo said quietly. It matters what they think we are. More ships continued to arrive. The refugee fleet grew to hundreds of vessels. Over 2 million people. With nowhere to go. Supplies dwindled. Arguments broke out. Some captains suggested they should try to force their way onto a world, take it by military power, and hold it against all resistance. Others, like Hyunwoo, still hoped for a peaceful solution. But as he stood on the bridge of his ship, looking down at the glowing fungal networks on the moon below, watching more ships arrive with more desperate people, he felt hope slipping away. Dr. Minji found him there late one night. "I've been analyzing the architect technology," she said. "The quantum signatures. The way information passes between worlds. It's like nothing we've ever seen. But there might be a way to interface with it, to hack into the system." "And do what?" Hyunwoo asked. "I don't know yet. Maybe convince a world to accept us. Maybe disable the defenses. It's a long shot. But it's something. How long would it take? Months, maybe a year, and we'd need resources we don't have." Hyunwoo looked at the refugee fleet on his screens. Hundreds of ships. Millions of people. All of them looking to him and the other captains for answers they didn't have. "Work on it," he said. "It's better than nothing." But he knew, deep in his heart, that they were running out of time and running out of options. The galaxy had spoken. Humanity was not welcome here. And the worst part was, he was starting to understand why. The refugee fleet hung in the darkness like a city of lights. 2 million people spread across hundreds of ships, eating through their supplies, watching their children grow hungry, and slowly losing hope. The civilian ships looked battered now, their hulls scarred from multiple evacuations, their systems failing one by one. Nobody had the resources to fix everything that was breaking. Admiral Seojun arrived on the fleet's 6th month in exile. His battlecruiser Times, Iron Will Times, was the largest military vessel humanity had sent to the stars, carrying 10,000 soldiers and enough weapons to conquer a small planet. Seojun himself was a hard man, with gray hair and cold eyes, a veteran of Earth's water wars, who believed that strength was the only language the universe understood. He called a meeting of all the ship captains. Captain Hyunwoo attended, as did Jiwon and dozens of others. They gathered in a virtual space, their holographic forms sitting around a conference table, while their physical bodies remained on their separate ships. "We've tried peace," Sojun said without preamble. "We've tried asking nicely. We've tried diplomacy. And where has it gotten us? We're dying out here while empty worlds sit below us. Worlds with air and water and food. I say we take what we need." "You're talking about war," Hyunwoo said quietly. "I'm talking about survival. There's a planet 3 weeks from here. Heavily forested, abundant resources, inhabited by pre-industrial aliens. They have spears and bows. We have plasma rifles and orbital bombardment. We can take that world in a month and hold it indefinitely." Many of the captains nodded in agreement. Desperation had made them cruel. Jiwon tried to object, tried to say that conquering other species made humanity no better than the worst empires of Earth's history. But she was shouted down. The vote was close, but it passed. The fleet would go to war. Youngho was 20 years old, and he had nothing left to lose. His parents had died during the evacuation from Kepler 442b, crushed in a stampede when the earthquake started. His sister had starved to death 2 months ago when their ship's food recyclers failed. He volunteered for Seojun's assault force because dying in battle seemed better than dying slowly in a metal coffin drifting through space. The planet was called Verdant by the scouts who first found it. It had thick jungles, wide rivers, and a native population of about 3 million aliens who looked almost human, with green skin and large eyes. They lived in wooden villages and farmed simple crops. They had no technology beyond basic tools. The invasion began at dawn. Dropships descended from orbit, carrying soldiers and equipment. The landing sites had been carefully chosen, far from major population centers. Seojun's plan was to establish a fortified base, then gradually expand outward, pushing the natives into smaller territories. For the first week, everything went according to plan. The soldiers built walls and set up defensive positions. Engineers began constructing permanent structures. Medical teams treated the sick refugees who had been living in cramped ships for too long. Young-ho stood guard duty on the perimeter wall, watching the jungle. It was beautiful here, in a way that made his heart ache. The trees were massive, their leaves a brilliant emerald green. Birds with rainbow feathers flew overhead. This could have been paradise, if only the universe had allowed it. Then the jungle began to fight back. It started with the trees. They released pollen that clogged air filters and made people's throats swell shut. 3 soldiers died before they figured out what was happening. Then the vines started growing faster than they could be cut, wrapping around buildings, pulling down walls. The rivers changed course overnight, flooding the lower sections of the base. It's just natural challenges, Seojun insisted. We'll adapt, we'll overcome. But it got worse. The animals attacked in coordinated waves that no natural instinct could explain. Packs of predators would strike simultaneously at 3 different points in the perimeter, as if following a battle plan. Birds dove at soldiers' faces, aiming for eyes. Insects carried diseases that seemed specifically designed to affect human biology. Dr. Minji, who had come down to study the planet, made a horrifying discovery. The native aliens were changing. She watched through binoculars as a village elder stood in the center of his settlement, his eyes glowing faintly. Around him, the other aliens worked on devices they shouldn't have been able to understand. Explosives, electronic jammers, sophisticated weapons. The planet is teaching them, she reported to Seojun. It's giving them knowledge, showing them our weaknesses. That's impossible, Seojun said. But his voice shook with doubt. Young-ho was on patrol when the first coordinated attack came. 100 natives emerged from the jungle, moving with military precision, using tactics they shouldn't have known. They had explosives that they threw at exactly the right points in the wall. They had chemical weapons that specifically targeted human biology. They fought like they had studied human warfare for decades, even though they had never seen humans before. The battle lasted 3 hours. 50 soldiers died. Twice that number were wounded. And when the natives retreated back into the jungle, they did so in perfect formation, covering each other, leaving no one behind. They had evolved from primitive farmers to effective soldiers in less than 2 weeks. Pull back to the landing site, Seojun ordered. We'll regroup and try again. But there was no regrouping. The next attack came that night. Then another at dawn. The jungle itself seemed to fight against them. Trees fell at strategic moments, crushing equipment. The ground collapsed beneath vehicles, swallowing them. Rain came in torrents that washed away fortifications. Young-ho watched men he had trained with die in ways that defied explanation. One soldier's rifle exploded in his hands, the metal twisting like something alive. Another sank into solid ground that suddenly became liquid. A third was torn apart by plants that moved faster than anything plant-based should be able to move. Admiral Seojun stood in the command center as reports of casualties flooded in. His iron confidence had cracked. He looked old suddenly, and afraid. How are they doing this? He whispered, to no one. Dr. Minji had the answer. She had been monitoring quantum signals from the planet's core. The architect's network is active. This world is communicating with every other world humanity has touched. Every planet that rejected us shared what it learned. They know our tactics. They know our technology. They know our weaknesses. And they're teaching this world how to kill us efficiently. The final assault came a week later. Thousands of natives, moving with perfect coordination, using weapons and tactics that should have been beyond them. The human soldiers fought bravely, but they were fighting the planet itself, and planets do not tire, do not retreat, do not give up. Admiral Seojun died in the last battle, crushed beneath a falling tree that seemed to aim for him specifically. Young-ho pulled 30 people onto the last evacuation shuttle as the base burned around them. He looked back as they lifted off and saw the natives standing in perfect lines, watching them go, their eyes glowing with borrowed intelligence. Of the 10,000 soldiers who came down, fewer than 4,000 made it back to orbit. The Times Iron Will Times hung in space like a broken tooth, damaged beyond repair by debris that had come from the planet itself, rocks thrown into orbit at impossible velocities. The fleet gathered again, diminished, traumatized, defeated. They had tried peace and been rejected. They had tried war and been destroyed. The other spacefaring civilizations had watched the battle, and now they truly feared humanity. No port would accept human ships. No station would allow them to dock for repairs. Captain Hyun-woo looked at his screens showing the scattered, damaged ships of the refugee fleet. Young-ho sat in his quarters, staring at nothing, his hands shaking. Salmin held her children and wondered if she would live to see them grow up. Ji-won sent message after message to the galaxy, begging for help, receiving only silence in return. They were alone in a hostile universe, and their supplies were almost gone. The refugee fleet drifted through empty space like ghosts. Food ran low. Medical supplies ran out. Every day brought new deaths, new funerals, new bodies committed to the void. The ships themselves were falling apart, systems failing one by one, and there were no spare parts, no repair facilities, nowhere to go for help. Dr. Unji was a quantum physicist who had spent most of the journey studying the strange signals that passed between architect worlds. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes that rarely blinked when she was concentrating. While others despaired, she worked 18-hour days in her laboratory, trying to understand the enemy that had defeated them. Late one night, she made a breakthrough. Captain Hyun-woo found her in her lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing complex equations and quantum signatures. She looked exhausted, but excited. "I understand it now," she said. "The Architect Network. I know what it is, and why it exists." She pulled up a galactic map. Thousands of worlds lit up in blue, forming a vast web across the stars. The architects were an ancient species, older than anything else we've found. They seeded life across the galaxy billions of years ago. But they didn't do it randomly. They had a design. "What kind of design?" Hyun-woo asked. "A balanced ecosystem. A galaxy-wide biosphere, where every world has a purpose. Where every species fits into a larger pattern. They engineered the genetic code of life itself to maintain this balance. If any species becomes too dominant, if anything threatens the pattern, the network activates defensive protocols." Dr. Minji joined them, listening with growing horror. "That's what happened to us. We triggered the defense system." "Yes," Unji confirmed, "but not because we're evil or dangerous. We triggered it because we don't fit. We're the wrong shape for their puzzle." She brought up another display, showing Earth isolated from the web of blue lights. Earth is a wild world. It evolved life independently, without the architect's interference. Every instinct we have, every adaptation, every piece of our biology, developed outside their grand design. We're not part of their system. We're incompatible with it. So, there's no world out there that will accept us, Hyun-woo said quietly. Not because they hate us, because we literally don't fit. Almost every habitable world in the galaxy was touched by the architects, Unji said. The few that weren't are too hostile for human life. We're locked out of paradise not by choice, but by biology. We're orphans, in a galaxy full of families we can never join. The news spread through the fleet like a disease. Some people refused to believe it. Others fell into deeper despair. But for Ji-hoon, an elderly historian who had lived through Earth's final days, the revelation brought a different kind of clarity. Ji-hoon called a meeting in the main hall of the Times Eternal Dawn *. Hundreds of people crowded in, their faces gaunt with hunger, their eyes hollow with loss. He stood before them, an old man with white hair, and told them a story they had forgotten. Earth was never dying, he said. I know they told you it was. I know you were shown images of polluted cities and empty aquifers and starving billions. But it was a lie. The crowd stirred with anger. Salmon stood up. My husband died in the food riots. Don't tell me it was a lie. The riots were real, Ji-hoon said gently. The suffering was real. But the cause was manufactured. The corporations that built these colony ships. The politicians who pushed the Frontier Initiative. They created the crisis on purpose. They restricted food supplies. They hoarded water. They spread propaganda about Earth's death because they profited from the exodus. He pulled up old documents, financial records, intercepted communications, evidence that had been buried but never truly destroyed. The megacorporations had made trillions selling colony slots. The politicians had secured power by offering escape from problems they themselves had created. Earth had problems, Ji-hoon continued. Serious problems. But they were solvable. The planet wasn't dying. We were just governed by people who cared more about profit than fixing what was broken. Dae-ho felt something break inside him. He had burned every bridge leaving Earth. He had told his family they were fools for staying behind. He had believed with all his heart that the Exodus was humanity's only hope. And it had all been based on lies. So what do we do? Someone shouted from the crowd. Even if Earth isn't dying, we can't go back. The journey would take years. Most of us would die before we got there. The fleet split into factions. Some demanded they try to return to Earth, no matter the cost. Others insisted they find a way to make the galaxy accept them. Fights broke out. Ships stopped communicating with each other. The fragile unity that had held the refugees together began to crumble. Dr. Minji proposed a desperate plan. We can hack into the Architect network. Dr. Unji has figured out how to access their quantum systems. If we can get deep enough into the code, maybe we can convince one world to accept us, or disable the defensive protocols, or find some way to make ourselves compatible. How long would it take? Hyunwoo asked. We'd need to find a world with strong Architect signals, land on it, set up quantum relays. The actual hack might take days or weeks. And there's a risk. If the system detects what we're doing, it might respond. What kind of response? I don't know. But the Architects had technology far beyond ours. If they left any active defenses, we could be in serious danger. The fleet captains met in virtual space one last time. The arguments went on for hours. Some supported Minji's plan. Others wanted to attempt the journey back to Earth. A few suggested they should split up, let each ship make its own choice. In the end, Captain Hyunwoo made the decision that would define humanity's future. We split the fleet, he said. Those with the fuel and the will can attempt the return to Earth. It's a 3-year journey, maybe 4, with our damaged ships. Many won't survive. And the rest? Ji-won asked. The rest will attempt Dr. Minji's plan. We'll find a world, hack into the Architect system, and try to make the galaxy accept us. It's a long shot, but it's something. Salmon chose immediately. I'm going home. My children deserve to grow up on the world where they belong. Dae-ho hesitated longer. He had nothing left on Earth. But he also couldn't stomach another failure in the stars. In the end, he stayed with Minji's group. I still believe humanity belongs out here, he said. I just need to figure out how to make it work. Young-ho joined the Earthbound fleet. He had seen enough of the galaxy's hostility. He wanted to die on a world that remembered his name. The fleet divided. Hyun-woo led the largest group, about 1 million people, across 300 ships, toward Earth. Minji took 50,000 volunteers, the Times, Eternal Dawn Times, and 20 other vessels, toward a barren world at the edge of known space, where architect signals were strong. As the two groups parted ways, moving in opposite directions through the void, everyone felt the weight of the choice. One group was giving up on the dream of the stars. The other was making one last, desperate bet that they could change fate itself. Neither group knew if they would survive. Both knew they would never see each other again. The journey home was 3 years of slow dying. Captain Hyun-woo watched his ships break down one by one. Engines failed. Life support systems collapsed. Food ran out faster than predicted because they had underestimated how many people were already sick, already weak, already close to death. Saman's daughter died 6 months into the journey. A simple infection that could have been cured with antibiotics, they no longer had. They held a funeral in the ship's cargo bay, and Saman stood there holding her remaining child, her face empty of tears because she had cried herself dry months ago. "Why did we ever leave?" she whispered to Hyun-woo. "Why did we believe their lies?" He had no answer for her. Ships were abandoned when their populations dropped below sustainable levels. The survivors crowded into fewer and fewer vessels. They burned furniture for warmth when the heating systems failed. They ate rations that had spoiled. They watched the old and the sick die and knew they might be next. Young-ho kept a journal. Every day, he wrote down the names of people who died. He felt he owed them that much. To be remembered. The list grew longer and longer. Mothers, children, soldiers who had survived the battle on Verdant only to starve in the darkness between stars. 3 years became 4. Then 5. The ships crawled through space at barely a fraction of their designed speed. Everything failing. Everything breaking. Of the 1 million people who started the journey, fewer than 400,000 were still alive when Earth finally appeared on their sensors. The planet looked impossibly beautiful. Blue and white and green, turning slowly in the void. Hyun-woo stood at the viewing port and felt something break inside him. Home. They had crossed the galaxy searching for paradise and found only death. All they had needed to do was stay. But the Earth they returned to was not the Earth they had left. The signals from the surface told a different story than the one in their memories. The mega-corporations that had pushed the exodus had collapsed under their own corruption. The political systems that had created artificial scarcity had fallen apart. In humanity's absence, those who remained had been forced to fix what was broken. The response to their arrival hail came from a coalition of regional governments. No single world authority. No corporate overlords. Just people trying to survive and build something better. "This is Earth Control. We've been expecting you. Begin your descent. We'll guide you to landing zones." Saman held her remaining child close as their shuttle descended through the atmosphere. Below them, cities sprawled across the landscape, but they looked different. Smaller, greener. The pollution clouds she remembered were gone. Rivers ran blue instead of brown. Forests covered areas that had been wasteland. "Mom," her child whispered. "Is that really home?" "Yes," Saman said. And for the first time in years, she felt something like hope. The landing was not triumphant. The survivors stumbled from their ships, sick and weak and traumatized. Medical teams waited with supplies and vehicles. The earthbound humans looked at the returning refugees with pity and sadness. These were people who had paid the highest price for believing in a false dream. Young-ho stepped onto Earth soil and fell to his knees. He pressed his hands into the dirt and wept. Around him, others did the same. They had traveled across the galaxy, seen wonders and horrors beyond imagination, and returned to the simple truth that this world, imperfect and difficult as it was, had always been their only real home. The earthbound humans helped the refugees settle. They built housing. They provided food and medicine. They listened to stories of the Exodus, the failed colonies, the battles and defeats, and they understood, finally, what their stubbornness in staying had saved them from. "We almost went too," one earthbound woman told Salmon. "We had tickets, but my mother was too sick to travel, so we stayed." After the Exodus ships left, things got worse for a while. But then the corporations couldn't sustain their lies anymore. The politicians lost power. We had to face our problems instead of running from them. It took 20 years, but we fixed them. Not perfectly. Earth still has problems. But we fixed them, far across the galaxy. Dr. Minji's group arrived at their destination. A barren world with no atmosphere, just rock and dust and strong architect signals emanating from deep underground. They landed and began setting up quantum relays, diving into the ancient network that connected all the galaxy's engineered worlds. Dr. Yunji worked without rest, her fingers flying across holographic keyboards, diving deeper into alien code than any human had gone before. Deho helped her set up the equipment, running cables across the lifeless surface. Minji coordinated the effort, watching readings that showed them penetrating layer after layer of the architect system. "We're in," Unji said one morning. "I can see the whole network. It's beautiful and terrible. Every world connected. Every ecosystem balanced. And here, in the center, I can see the protocols that reject us. If I can just modify them, convince the system we're compatible, we could." The world struck. Not with earthquakes or poison or teaching weapons to primitive aliens. This world had no life to weaponize. Instead, it attacked with pure energy. Beams of matter conversion erupted from the ground. Gravity wells formed in localized spots, crushing equipment and people. Reality itself seemed to distort around them. "It knows we're here," Minji screamed over the chaos. "It's defending itself. Evacuate. Everyone evacuate now." Deho ran for the shuttles, dragging injured researchers. He looked back and saw Dr. Unji still at her station, surrounded by failing shields, trying to buy them time to escape. "Unji, come on. I almost have it," she shouted back. "I can see the pattern. I understand how to." A gravity, well-formed, directly beneath her. She had time for one last scream before she was crushed into something smaller than an atom. The equipment around her imploded. The quantum relays shattered, and with them died the last hope of hacking into the architect system. The surviving ships barely escaped the planet's orbit. Of 50,000 who attempted the mission, fewer than 20,000 made it back to space. Deho sat in the shuttle and stared at his shaking hands. They had failed. The galaxy would never accept them. Dr. Unji had died for nothing. The survivors used their last fuel to chase after the earthbound fleet, hoping to catch up. It took them 2 years of desperate flight. Many more died during that journey. But Deho survived, driven by a need to see Earth one last time, to admit he had been wrong, to beg forgiveness from the world he had abandoned. When his ship finally reached Earth, he could barely stand. The medical teams carried him from the shuttle. He looked up at the blue sky, breathed air that tasted sweet, and understood what he had lost by leaving. 5 years after the refugees began returning, a memorial was built, a vast wall with names carved into black stone. 400,000 dead. Millions of lives destroyed, all because humanity had believed the lie that paradise was somewhere else, that their problems could be solved by running away. Captain Hyun-woo stood before the memorial on its dedication day. He was old now, gray-haired and bent. Beside him stood Saman, her remaining child grown into a young adult. Young-ho was there too, his journal finally filled, the names of the dead preserved. Dae-ho came on crutches, his body broken by the journey but his spirit finally at peace. Hyun-woo spoke to the gathered crowd. "We looked to the stars for salvation, and found only rejection. Every world out there has its own story, its own purpose, its own design. We don't fit in their story because we have our own. Earth is not perfect. Earth will never be paradise. But Earth is ours, and we are hers. That is enough." The crowd stood in silence. Some cried, others simply touched the wall, running their fingers over the names of loved ones lost. Children asked their parents what the memorial meant, and the parents struggled to explain the price of believing beautiful lies. Humanity did not abandon space exploration. Ships still went out, studying the galaxy, learning from it. But the age of colonization was over. Humans understood now that they were orphans in a galaxy designed for others. They could visit, they could observe, they could learn, but they could not stay. Earth itself healed slowly. The returning refugees brought with them knowledge of advanced technology, of alien worlds, of things beyond imagination. But they also brought humility. They knew now that having a home was more valuable than finding paradise. Salmon's remaining child grew up to be a teacher. She taught the next generation about the Exodus, about the price of running from problems instead of fixing them. Her classes would visit the memorial, and she would tell them her sister's name, carved in the stone, lost to the dream of false paradise. Young Ho planted a tree at the memorial. A simple tree, nothing exotic or alien, just an earth oak. He tended it every day, watching it grow, knowing it would outlive him. It was his way of saying he was sorry. His way of honoring all those who died, searching for a home they already had. And on clear nights, when the stars came out, humans looked up at them with wonder, but also wisdom. The galaxy was vast and beautiful and full of worlds, but none of those worlds would ever be home. Home was here. Home had always been here. And that, finally, was enough.